Hey, welcome back. It's good to have you back again, and I'm fantastically happy to be here as well. So, if you haven't caught on to it yet by the title and the name card and searching me on YouTube or any of that stuff, I am Josh, and this is my show, Josh Talks About Stuff. This is a show where Josh, well, essentially, it's in the name, talks about stuff. So, we've had a lot of chats over the weeks, and I can't believe that this is episode 10. I've been doing this for almost, 10 hours? I mean, that's some serious rounding up on my end. But hey, it's a lot of 45-minute episodes. I'm not going to include the first one though, so really I guess it's only 9. But, just give it to me anyway. I kind of would like to say 10. It's a big round number. It makes me feel pretty good. But hey, like I said, I hope your week has been fantastic. Mine's been pretty up and down. I've got a few things to chat about this week. A friend of mine actually sold his car recently. It's an MX-5 and it's something he's had for a long time. Similar to me, I used to have something very similar to this too. Back in the day, my original NA that I had, I bought it when I was just on 21, I believe. I think I just turned 21 and I bought it like a week or so after my birthday, or maybe a month or so after my birthday. I think it's kind of blur. Don't remember exact dates, but it was a long, long time ago. And I remember the whole drive back and the moment I went through this tunnel. Now, for those who don't know, NA6s, which is the first generation of MX-5, they've got pop-up headlights on them. And I knew that, and I knew it had pop-up headlights. And I'd seen it displayed with the headlights up in the driveway when I went to pick it up too. And I remember the drive there, and I was so eager to get it. And I finally got it, got in my car, and just how special that thing felt when I was driving it home. And it started to go from late afternoon into dusk, and I went through this tunnel, and it was a little bit dark, and I turned on the headlights, and I just remember this giddy feeling came over me where the headlights popped up, and seeing that dash illuminate all in green, because I had no idea that the dash was green, and how special it felt to me. It was a big deal. It was my first sports car, but it wasn't just that. It was the first thing, like I bought cars before on my own, but it was the first one that wasn't bought just out of utility. It was something I genuinely wanted. Prior to that, my experience with cars really was just things that I bought for utilitarian reason, just transport really. But this was more than transport, and it was really special to me. And I had this car for a good 10 years, and I loved it for like to absolute pieces. It was extremely special to me, and I probably didn't have it 10 years, maybe probably 7 or 8 years, but I had it for a long period of time. And during that, I grew up with that car, being that I had just met this community of people when I was 21, and I started just networking with all these other car enthusiasts that I'd never met before. And I've got lifelong relationships with so many of these people, and I'm glad that I bought that car for every single one of those people I wouldn't have met otherwise. Met them through forums, through going to that place I mentioned in the past, Garage Cafe in Carlton. It was a big deal for me back then. And one of the biggest things is just seeing how much, when I look over the years, I look at the photos of it too, and how much the car changed and how much I changed as well through that process. I mean, I had different suspension in it. I had coilovers, shocks and springs at one stage. I had different types of all of those as well. At one point, it was supercharged. At one point, it was turbocharged. At another point, it had flares on it, had a half cage in it. Gosh, where else to go with that? I pretty much did every conceivable thing I could have to that car within my interests. I think the only thing I hadn't really done was like a built engine, and that's about it. But everything else I'd done. I even done the normally aspirated route minus cams, and I absolutely adored that thing. And over the years, it sort of evolved with me, and it changed its form. Just like as my tastes changed over time as well, this car changed as well. But I remember right before I wrecked it, I got to this point where I sort of sat with the car and I kind of started feeling that I was growing distant with it, that I just wasn't using it as much as I should have. Because at that point in time, I had a Civic then too. I had an ED sedan. It was a silver sedan with some work CR01 wheels on it, which were awesome. It looked so good. I loved that car. I had little window deflectors on it, and I had, I think it was a DA9 front lip that I cut down to fit. It looked sweet. It was my favorite thing. I had a stand, because I had a Nardi wheel in the MX-5. I put the standard MX-5 steering wheel into the Civic as well, and it just made me happy that it was just a sensible daily driver that I could just get in. It did everything reliably for the most part. I hate carbies, but That's a story for another day. but yeah, I loved it. It was a great car, and I found myself just cruising in that more and more and more often. And then around that period of time, I think I got into bikes as well, and I just stopped using the MX-5 just a little bit more and more, and I stopped using it and ended up garage for a fair bit of time. And I was actually contemplating selling it for a decent amount of time as well. And I couldn't bring myself to it because I had so much sentimental value. So much of my life was spent in this. I built so many relationships with people. I built essentially a life around this thing. Like, the car didn't define my life or anything like that, because at the end of the day, it's just a piece of metal with some wheels on it, and it is what it is. I hate describing cars like that, and at one point in my life, I could never imagine myself saying that. But the reality is, that's the truth. That the relationships are more important that you build from it. The experiences are what's important. And I had a lot of fantastic experiences with that car. And I loved it to pieces. And when I wrecked it, I was heartbroken because I felt like I had some adventures that I really, wasn't quite done with. I was going to get it resprayed and everything was going to look really slick. And I was really excited for that. And it just didn't happen. And then I had this moment where I was like, okay, well, now that's gone. I was on the fence whether I sell it or not, and I wasn't sure. I was umming and ahhing, and then it got taken from me. And it was about 2 years I went without the car, and eventually I parted it out and sold a bunch of bits and pieces off it and whatnot, because it wasn't salvageable. I got the damage was in the rear end, and it was quite catastrophically damaged. But the reason I mention that is because I had an opportunity at that point to change, to do something different. And there was a bunch of other cars that I was looking at getting. I mean, I was considering getting a ZZW30 MR2, which is, I've always wanted a mid-engine car. And I thought about that, but ultimately I decided against it, and I decided against a bunch of other cars. Like, I looked at Evos, I looked at Civics as well, like Type Rs, like an EP3, all sorts of different vehicles. And in the end, I just decided, you know what? Let's just go back to basics, and I bought a stock NA6 MX-5 again because I decided that I wasn't done with that. And a large part of me for a really long period of time regretted that decision. Initially, I really loved it, and it was fun getting back into it, and I loved driving it completely standard because it was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. But when I turboed it again and basically turned it into the old car, minus the flares and all that kind of flashy stuff, but performance-wise, it drove exactly the same. Same ECU, same turbo setup, all that jazz. But I guess I'd moved on at that point. And it wasn't the same. Or that's exactly the problem. It was the same, but that enjoyment that I had at that one period of time when I was, in my 20s, it was something that was special to me then, that it was a goal that I'd always wanted to do, to have a turbo MX-5, and I did it. And for all intents and purposes, it was done. It was over. I already closed the door on that, and it was wrecked. And yeah, I had a couple of okay drives with it, but I just felt like there was this deep regret inside. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe I shouldn't have bought that. And I beat myself up for it for years as well, thinking that, I could just sell this car, but now I've got it, and it felt like I couldn't turn my back on it. And I've come to realize what that is. And it's a similar conversation that I had with one of my friends as well. And you might actually get to meet him too. I should mention that. One of my friends, I'm not going to name him because I don't know if he wants to go under a pseudonym or not, but he's actually going to join me on one of these episodes down the line, or hopefully soon, and we'll have a chat about some different things, different opinions on video games and whatnot, movies and all sorts of stuff. And he's massively into cars as well, and mountain biking, it seems. So I hope he doesn't mind mentioning that now, but I'll let him do the talking. But we had a big conversation about this recently, and ultimately I came to the conclusion, I guess, not so much advice for him, but more for myself than anything, that sometimes moving on, it's difficult, but I guess you got to realize that it's not like moving on means you have a void there that you need to fill. I think in a lot of ways, you've already filled that void already with something else, and it's just like shedding a skin. You don't need it anymore. And in his case, he sold his turbo MX-5. It's turbo, it had flares, it was just like mine. It was fantastic, and I love that thing to pieces. Had a fastback on it, and all these different bits and pieces I liked as well. And And I was so glad that he got to build this dream car that, made him happy, and he got to have all these experiences in it. But ultimately, he found other interests, and they became something that was more special to him. And the more time he spent with those interests, the less time he spent on the car, and the car just sort of sat in the garage. And that was similar to myself. And I remember in my personal experience, just walking straight past the car to go straight to my motorbike. And after a while, I decided, oh, I'll take the Mazda for a trip out. And it's kind of funny because every time I took it out to the twisty roads or wherever it was, I kept thinking in the back of my mind, you know, yeah, this was fun, but I wish I took my bike on this road. I would have had so much more fun on my bike. Oh man. And just imagining my bike and just every corner I went through, even though I was taking it in my car and that was fine, I kept visualizing that I was on my bike, and I'd almost, as I put my head into the corner to turn, I'd like lean my head a little bit as if I was on my bike looking through the corner, and I realized I'd already filled that gap. That void that I had that was there, I'd already filled it with something else. I just didn't need this anymore. And I think for me, I know that I'd be happy with just a standard MX-5 because I've kind of come to accept that the one that I've got, when I fix it, when I eventually get around to that, whenever that's going to happen, it's something that there's something simple in that car, I think, when it's bone standard. Just, I like the simplicity of it, the fact that it's not powerful, and you got to kind of make do with what you've got. If anyone's ever driven, I'm going to explain this in a different way. It's that age-old saying, it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow. And oh man, is that the truth. I've come to learn that the hard way. For the longest time, I always liked the idea of having something faster, something objectively better. And yeah, the car was objectively better in the way, and I've said this in the past as well, and I hope I don't sound like a broken record here, but I really have to really beat that home, is that objectively fast, or when people talk about spec sheets, like when you're at a dealership and so on, it doesn't mean anything. Yeah, something can be objectively better, but better doesn't mean more fun. I think a lot of, and this is subjective too, so don't take what I'm saying as being the truth on anything. But for me, this opinion is really based on the fact that I find character flaws to be something more engaging. I see that in films with characters and so on too. When there's a character out there who's got, some horrible character flaw. Like you look at characters like in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and a lot of them are horrible people, but you love them because there's something endearing about that, and they fail a lot of the time. They don't always succeed. They're not good people either, and they all have horrible, crippling character flaws. Or even in The Office, you look at Ricky Gervais's character, David Brent, who's a sad and pathetic person, but you feel empathy for him and you love him because there's an element to that performance that really sort of strikes a chord with people because it feels real. It's very dramatic and it feels like someone who actually exists because real people are like that. Real people have character flaws. They're not perfect. At least I've never met anyone who's perfect, and I'm certainly not perfect by a long shot. And I just think that with cars as well, that kind of, once you go down that road of everything becomes so perfect and so good handling, it grips perfect, and there's no tire squeal or anything, and you can drive it like crazy hard, and the limit is way above your potential, and it's got so much power and so much torque and all these different things. It starts feeling like driving a calculator after a while. It's too good. And I know that sounds really strange to say it's too good, and that's probably not even the right way to phrase it, but I'll put it this way. It feels sterile, it feels too overly calculated, premeditated, and it feels overly planned. It doesn't have that spontaneity to it. And that's what I like about the standard, just stock MX-5. Maybe with the little things fixed up, like suspension and bushings and stuff that are, mechanically not great to be standard. So what I mean by that, there's the things that you can fix on it. For instance, the standard bushings are a little bit floppy, and the standard suspension, I found the stroke on it is just way too long to the point where you actually sit on bump stops quite a lot of the time, which is crashy and not great. Even on plush brand new MX-5 suspension, on the early NAs anyway, the suspension just has way too much travel. So you'll come into a corner and you'll find you'll end up like scrubbing tire on the guard as well because there's just that much flex in it and it's not comfortable. And I found that having decent coilovers like Shockworks in it, or a company like what are they called? MCA, like the MCA Blues that I've got in mine. I personally found they gave a really sort of stock feeling ride quality to them. But the benefit though was that it just felt like firm, but without being hard. So they were quite forgiving as well, but it loaded up nicely. So just things like that. They're the little things so that you can sort of tighten the screws up on. But the main point I really wanted to hit home is you shouldn't feel guilty about moving on. And this goes with anything too. I think falling out of love with things is kind of natural. Things only have a shelf life. Whether it's cars, or it's a motorbike, or it's even music, for instance. People's taste changes, and you can't expect to be the same person you were 10 years ago and expect to love all the things that you liked 10 years ago. And it doesn't mean that you abandon those things and you're left with nothing. As you've grown, you've gained new things as well. And a great testament to that is something that I never thought I would ever say in my life. I've actually really gotten into gardening lately. Yeah, that's right. I said it, gardening. I never thought for a million years I'd be into that. But there's something satisfying about it. You know, I used to love working on cars for a large part of my life. You know, I liked the menial sort of task of the mindfulness, I guess you could probably say, of just sitting there with mundane tools, just turning spanners, and you had a goal in mind and you had something to work towards. But as you're doing it, it feels like there's something peaceful about it where that part of your mind just switches off and you're just kind of just focusing on the task, living in that moment. And I kind of fell out of love with working on cars for that reason. I hated just getting grease and dirt up my nails, and even working with gloves. I hated trying to undo like a really tight thing and pushing and then my hand slips off the socket and I punch something and end up with cuts all over my hands. If anyone's worked on all this stuff, they know exactly what I'm talking about, and I'm sure you do as well. But it's just this, there's something about it which, I don't know, it's a physical element I get kind of sick of. But I found with gardening, I got that same feedback, that same mindfulness of just sitting there edging the garden, or mowing lawns, or I mean that's not really gardening, but I guess I'm going to put it in that same kind of wheelhouse as well. But just pruning plants and doing weeding and stuff, and 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 like edging the entire like outskirts of a pathway, and then pulling all the moss and weeds out of the yard, and killing it all off, and then being able to look at it after it's done and just feel this sense of accomplishment. And during the work, it doesn't feel like work. It just feels like I'm doing something, putting myself into it. But I get to relax that part of my brain that stresses over things, that thinks about things, that overthinks things. So the point I really want to hit home here is there's things that are going to be in your life as well that maybe you might feel guilty because there's something that, whether it could even be a relationship, to be honest, and maybe you guys were compatible once, you know, compatible, not compatible, geez. Maybe you guys were compatible at one stage, and no matter how much you've tried to work through things or try and feel that again, maybe you've lost that sensation because you're a different person now. Maybe they're a different person and you guys don't connect, and that's okay. It's fine to move on. But it is just what it is, you know, and it's interesting too, because I think that kind of interlinks into the next point too, which is the way that we're raised to cling on to things as well like that. I think also we're raised to feel like we have no value as well. What I mean by that is it kind of, there's a conversation I had with a friend recently, and it kind of hit me. It was talking about sales, and when I worked at a dealership, and even just on the phone as well to people just doing cold canvassing calls and all that kind of stuff too, in any kind of sales environment, there's something I noticed which is a really strange phenomenon, and I really didn't want to say the C word in this, which is capitalism. Don't worry, it's not the other C word, because I don't want to make this too political, and I say that every week. Oh gosh, I always say that too. But I think that no system of government or system of anything really is infallible. And I notice that there's one problem with it that I see, and I know that people are going to call me ungrateful or selfish or call me whatever, and that's fine. But just take this as just an opinion. And I think it's okay to have opinions on both sides as well. And I love to play the devil's advocate. So I think this is probably the best system we've got currently. And I'm going to preface this heavily by saying that. But where the issue is, I think about how people have no value. And And I know that sounds like a weird concept to say, but I think about sales, for instance. Now, when you look at like whether it's a car dealership or it's in any kind of sales environment, there's a cornerstone of it, which is the business needs one thing. The business needs to make money, and that's that really is just a business in general. That's what their primary goal is to turn a profit. And it's naive to think it's not. Businesses aren't there for you to just work a job and get paid. They don't exist for you. They exist for themselves so they can make a profit so that someone who started the business, kind of like I said in the past with the sort of formula to how the businesses kind of their framework works, is to really find a need and then try and offer that need to someone, but outsourcing it there. So adding value to that need, to that customer. So let's have a look at that in a different model then. So in sales, like I mentioned before, what are your overheads? Okay, so you've got all of the staff that are there, you've got to pay for because you need the staff to create the business. Otherwise, you can't just, have an entire a shop just manned by a single person taking on a ridiculous amount of work. Maybe it could be done, but in a lot of cases, it's more work than a single person can do. And then you got to think about the other things too. Let's say it's a car dealership. Okay, well, all of those cars that are there, a lot of those, if not all of them, will be bought on credit. So they're on credit and there's probably interest on those as well. And then they pay lot fees for having all of those on the lot too. So you got all these different costs there, which means it's their business's incentive to try and get people into the business, as in customers to come in, to try and sell to those people. And you think from based on that, right, that the business's main priority is to get paid, which it is, right? So you would think the business needs the customer, therefore the customer is valued. In some cases, that is the case. In my experience, though, it works a little bit different to that, and it's kind of odd. The idea is that the business will front itself to the customer as not needing the customer, to sort of say, hey guys, well, I've got all these brand new cars here for sale, but look, if you want to buy one, that's cool, but honestly, I'm happy for you to walk away. I don't really need you. I don't really need your money. I mean, we're doing pretty good as it is. Because they're trying to sell you a lifestyle and they're trying to sell you an image of success, or they're trying to project an image of success. And what they do is they try and create a need. And that need is for them to say, we don't need your money, but you need our product. That you needing the product is more important than us taking your money for it, which is the lie that retail tells people. Because at the end of the day, that's not true. Yeah, you might want the product, but it's very rare that the product is a need. But they create this idea that you have no value. It's the product that has the value, that you need it more than it needs you. And that happens with employment too. I know this is kind of dangerous ground to talk about as well, but the reality is that with a lot of employment as well, your boss at the end of the day needs you, and they need you to operate with them, to make their company work, because without you, a vital part of their business can't get fulfilled. Whether it's going to be a basic job like customer support or something like that, they need you to speak to those customers because they don't have anyone else to do it because they're so spread thin on other things. Or whether it's a people manager and they need people to look after those employees, or a regional manager to make sure everything else works across the business. And everyone has a job, and those jobs are paid. Now, the reality is the business needs you to make those happen. And as a result, you're contracted in, so to speak, and you're trading your valuable time for money as compensation. So what the business is really doing internally is saying, okay, Josh, we need you in we need a person to fulfill this job. I want you to do this job. And I know it's going to be a lot of hours, and I know it's going to be time that's taken away from your life that you're living, that, your valuable time, which we'll get to is not valuable, your valuable time in your life. So what we're prepared to do is we're prepared to compensate you. And here's the key, is if that's the case, and if that's what's really going on, then you really should be the one who's in charge of saying or dictating to them your terms of employment. But that's not the society we live in. You know, if you're willingly taking away from your time to help someone else out, you should be the one saying, yeah, okay, but that's not enough money. I need to work for a little bit more than that. But we've been so brainwashed with this idea of us having no value unless we're working, that we should be grateful to the business to say, oh, yes, sir, thank you. I thank you for this opportunity for you to give me money for my time that's otherwise not valuable to anyone, because I would have just wasted it doing things that weren't employment or weren't building up some private enterprise's business so some rich guy can buy another yacht. You know, like, that's the insanity of it all. This idea that this mind game that people will try and throw at you as if they don't need you when they desperately do need you, and they undervalue you. You know, they don't, because you only live a certain amount of time, and that's it. You don't get a retry as far as we know. You know, we don't get a second life. And once you're done, that's it. And you think about that, and you put that in context of, think of all the things that you're into, all of your passions and your hobbies and your interests and the people that you love that you want to spend time with, and things that you want to surround yourself with, things that you want to do. And now imagine that a large portion of your time is now taken away. Like 20 years or 30 years of your life has been cut out to go to some business, so someone else at the top who's essentially set this up. Because once again, remember, the primary function of the business isn't to keep you employed. It's not about employee satisfaction. It's turning a profit. For who? For who? Who's the one turning the profit? You know, where did this go? It's not so the business can make money and it goes to everyone and the employees. You know, it's a naive way to look at it. I'm sure maybe there's some charitable business out there like that, but that's not how it works. All that money channels up the line. You'll get residual payments, which is just based on the time that you've worked there that they've allotted to you and your salary package or whatever it is. But the majority of those will go to either shareholders, or it'll go straight to the business owner. Because at the end of the day, you think of the business from one person, right? Is where it starts from. And you go back to that same model that I've spoken about before, which is it's one person who's identified a need, and then what they've done is they've added value to that need, and then they've created a system where they can employ other people at a reduced rate to do that same job that they could do themselves, and then they subcontract that work out to people, and then eventually it gets bigger and more bureaucratic, and then you end up with HR systems and all that kind of jazz into it, and it all goes down that sort of rabbit hole. But it is interesting, though, I find this idea that we're sort of trained from an early age to have this idea that we don't have any actual value. Which is strange, because a lot of the people who end up being in these managerial positions as well, maybe not a lot of them, but some of them, I want to change the way I sort of phrase that, because I don't want to throw people under the bus, because I've had good managers before. I've had fantastic managers before. People who have gone above and beyond to advocate for me too, which is beautiful. I love that. And there's nothing better than having someone who has your best interests in mind. That I think a lot of people who in those roles, they don't really get the gravity of where they sit within the company or what the company even is. It's like they don't understand. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but I think that's a big commentary on, I hate using the society word because I feel like I need another word for that instead. But a lot of our education system is flawed like that. I found that there's something interesting just in general, which is this idea, this concept of memory versus understanding. Maybe you understand where I'm going with this, but there's something I noticed, and you'll see this often on like trivia shows and stuff. We have this idea just in our communities. Yeah, there you go. See, I found another word for society. We have this thing that happens where we think that being able to recite off the top of our head very quickly a series of facts and trivia and so on equals knowledge. And the reality is it's not, because a lot of it's not practical. And I'll tell you a story about myself. It's not a big one, so don't worry. And it's pretty simple too, but there's a really basic understanding or a basic concept, which is how you learn things. Now, back in primary school, I learned my times tables and whatnot. Everyone has done this. But I remember doing it from this. Maybe you've known this as well. Do you remember those things where there's like a tape cassette you could get? Yeah, sounds like I'm old now. But there's like a video, like a video or like an audio thing you can listen to, and you put it on, and it will have like a music track to it, and there'll be like someone going, "1, 2 is 2, 2, 2 is 4," like etc. And it will just be like that over and over, and it's like a catchy, weird tune, and it gets in your head, and you listen to it enough times. Eventually, when those multiplication questions come up, just in primary school or high school, it just clicks and you just know the answer straight away, or you're able to recite that information straight away and be like, oh yeah, 4, 4, 16, yeah, done. But the thing is, I remember when I was in probably late high school, when I was like 17, 18, or it could even be in post high school, there was a moment where I was doing mathematics there, and I kind of had this realization that I knew all the answers, and I knew the formulas to write down and whatnot to show my workings. And a lot of the times that I was just doing it, I was just doing it from memory because I just knew that these pictures of numbers equals these things. But I wasn't actually, I knew the concept of how to make the answers, but I wasn't consciously actually using the logic part of my brain to work these things out using intuition alone. And it made me have this almost like existential is probably not the right way to put it, but this crisis where I started to doubt myself and I started to really think about it. And I realized that there's a lot of things, and I don't mean just maths, but there was a lot of things I realized that I didn't actually understand or I didn't really know. What I mean is, there was a lot of things where I had the answers to things, or I was able to recite why, what something was, but I didn't really get the how it worked or why I came to those conclusions. I just had my preset selections of things to say, but it just kind of hit me then, and I ended up relearning a lot of stuff around that time as well. And that even went into nursing as well. I remember when I worked in nursing, there was a period of time where, like, when you're doing morphine injections and so on, the morphine comes in a little ampule, and sorry, I'm not going to get into like the nitty gritty of how all the maths works on it or anything like that. But the ampule will say something like there's 2 milligrams or something, like it's a 5 milligram ampule or something, or a 10 milligram ampule or something like that, and it's like the dosage is like I don't know, 2 mil in 2 milligrams in 1 mil or something like that, and you've got to like work it out what the dosage is actually going to be. Anyway, it's really basic maths in it, just some basic division and whatnot, and there's not a whole lot to it. And you can work it out, and you can work it out intuitively as well, just by hand, and just on a piece of paper, just quickly work it out, smash it out, done. And I always thought it was good to have that in your mind, because there's going to be a time where you don't have information available to you. Where I'm going with that is, there was people I worked with who would inherently disagree and say, no, there's no point learning that because I've got my phone on me. I can just bring out this special morphine sulfate calculator, and it will tell me how much morphine and how much Maxilon or whatever to inject, and that's fine. I can work out the ratios based on this. And worst case scenario, there's always like a book here, and it tells you what the calculations are, and it's got a breakdown of all of them and what to do. And I'd always think, yeah, that's great, but what happens if you're in a workplace where they don't allow you to have your mobile on the floor? What happens if that book is missing from the drug room? What happens if you're in a busy area and you just have people shouting at you and stuff and you can't bring it out, or whatever it is, or whatever the scenario is? What if that's not how, you're not in your ideal element and you fish out of water then? You want to make damn sure that you get that right, because that could be the difference between life and death with someone. It's a big deal. You need to know these things, and the intuition is far more important to understand how and why you get there, not just what the dosage is. You need to understand the process of getting to that. Same with like parallel parking. I've seen with driving instructors, there's a way that you can do parallel parking. It's like a formula to it. You pull up next to a car, assuming there's a car there to pull up next to, and if you get your front wheels aligned so parallel to their front wheels, so you're directly next to them, so your wheelbases are both aligned, and you've got a free park behind that car. I forget what the principle is, but you can turn the wheel, say if you're on a left-hand drive, you're on a right-hand drive car where you're parking on the left side of the road, you would turn your wheel to the left I think it's something like 2 turns to the left, and then you start pulling in, and when you're halfway through, you turn it 1 turn to the right. Something like that. I don't know. But the thing is, yeah, it's great for you to learn that, and it's great to have this cheat code to parallel parking, because no one likes parallel parking. I hate it, but it's relatively easy to do. But the thing is, if you learn it that way and you stick to this formula, what ends up happening is it's great for those times where you're in that perfect situation. But what happens if you have to borrow someone's car and it's a longer wheelbase than what you're used to? What happens if it's got a completely different steering rack ratio on it as well? You know, what if it's like a power assisted steering rack as well, where like 1 turn doesn't equal the same amount of lock that it would on another car? What if it's a progressive steering rack as well? So like on something like a Holden Commodore, for instance, where the more you turn it, the more the steering wheel, the more the ratio changes as well. It's not 1 for 1. What happens if it's like that? What if it's a car with no power steering and it's got a really direct ratio or a quick rack in it? You don't know. There's all these different things that can happen. And what happens if the gutter isn't parallel? There might be a big, like, I don't know what you call it, but like a big break in the guttering or a pothole that you have to steer around as you're going in. There could be a plethora of different things that could happen, like a bunch of different scenarios that could come up that you're now dangerously unprepared for. And if you try and go in with this formula without understanding the methodology behind how it works and what your wheels are doing when you're turning them and get a feel for that, now you can't use intuition to problem solve your way out of it. And that's why I think so much of society really hinges on that. And it becomes that same problem you see with a lot of things. For instance, the idea of the letter of the law is more important than the spirit of the law, which is something I inherently disagree with. You see that with, I think, one of the greatest things, and everyone's seen this before. How many times have you seen someone who's been drinking, maybe they're over the limit, and they think, oh, yeah, maybe I shouldn't drive because I'll get fined, or I don't want to lose my license. Yeah, it's not about that. It's not about you drink a certain amount and then they fine you. That's not the problem. That's not it's the crime, I guess, but that's not where the risk is. It's not a risk of getting a fine. It's a risk of killing someone on the road because you're too drunk and you don't have a good situational awareness and your reaction time's not good. So you might run into another car, or you might fall asleep at the wheel or pass out, or God knows what, or you might get distracted more easily and look at your phone or look down, or all sorts of things could happen. And because they're so pent up on the letter of the law being the issue, that's when you end up with people who go, oh, it's okay, I'll take the back way home because it avoids the cops. And it just does my head in. Even tire manufacturers you see this with too. Like, the fact that like there's economy tires out there is just mind-blowing. Because think about how like a tire works, like the physics of it. And the basic look, I'm not one to talk about like heavy technical things as well, because I'm not the greatest at explaining a lot of those, but a real quick rundown of tires. Let's take this in a car, for instance. Your tires is made of rubber, and the compound of the rubber is usually quite soft, and the road is a corrugated surface, and the road's not dead flat, and it's intentionally not dead smooth. Dead smooth will give you no grip, and the reason it will give you no grip is because the road itself has little tiny holes and little nooks and crannies and all that kind of stuff in it. Now, as your tire rolls over those, your tire will sink into those little cracks and whatnot, and it interlocks with them. You know, it binds itself together. If you put one hand out and then you put your knuckles against your other hand and you kind of push them together, it's kind of like that. And as it rolls across, it'll leave bits of rubber in the road. And as a result of that, you end up with your tire taking away bits of its tread over time. Eventually, it can get worn down all the way to the canvas that's underneath it, where there's no rubber left. And, you know, hopefully you get tires before then, but there'll be no rubber left on the surface to actually interlock with the road, and it will just be a flat, smooth object which doesn't interlock with it. Which is the same reason that when you get brand new tires, they tell you to go easy on them and wear them in, because it's not that your tire, because tires don't, like these days, they don't have casting on them, they don't have gel releases or anything like that. They usually use a Teflon mold to make a tire now. So that idea of your tire having like a weird film on it, it's not the case. They use that still on the sidewalls just to keep the lettering on the tire, right? But on the actual tread, not the case anymore. Some manufacturers can do it. Some Chinese manufacturers will do it as well because it's just relatively cheap old technology. But for the most part, it's all done with Teflon now, and it comes out of a press. And once it's done, it's done. Easy. Okay, now that's why they say that when it comes out of the cast, it's got a perfectly smooth surface on it. And perfectly smooth surfaces on a corrugated road with lots of ups and downs and holes and stuff in it, it's going to skate over the top of it and it's not going to interlock with it. But then over time, as the tire gets heated and it gets a little bit more warmth in it, the rubber becomes more malleable. And then that rubber will start to scuff up on the surface of the road. And eventually it will have like a surface that's more bedded in to the surface of the road with lots of little ruts and lots of little holes and stuff in it too. Some of them will be microscopic and you won't even see them. The tire will look like it's smooth, but it'll have like an almost sandy kind of finish to the tread. And that's what will bind better to the road. Now, the reason I say the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law is we have roadworthies here in Australia, and a lot of countries have the same thing, but we have like a tire tread wear limit. So once your tire gets beyond a certain point, if your tire is up for needing replacement and you're still driving on it, then that's an infringement. So you can get fined for that. And on top of that too, if you're trying to register a vehicle and your vehicle doesn't have roadworthy tires because they're below the tread limit, then what can happen is you won't get your car on the road because you'll need to replace them with new tires. Which is fine, right? Except here's the thing. A lot of tires, like economy tire brands, there will be a really hard rubber compound. And the idea behind it is it's hard wearing because it's not actually interlocking with the road. And it's a very like almost like a plasticky feeling rubber. And all it does is sit on the road, doesn't make much grip. But the benefit of it, if you can call it a benefit at all, is that you borderline don't have to replace them for like 5 years or however long. And they'll last goodness knows how many Ks. And that's so the idea that it's going to be like an economic choice for you to spend money on those types of tires because they don't cost you anything because you don't have to replace them because they'll last you for basically ever at the expense of doing what a tire does. Just think of that for a moment. Like, what is a tire? What do you use it for? The reality is, it is the one thing which holds your car onto the road. It is the only part of your car which is actually in contact with the street. So it doesn't matter how good your brakes are or how bad your brakes are, if you put your foot on the brakes and the wheels start to slow down, if they're not gripping with the road, then it makes no difference. Your car's not going to stop. So the idea behind just following these asinine ideas of the letter of the law being the be-all and end-all is just crazy to me. You see that with everything. You see that from HR. You see that in a lot of businesses. You see that with products, like I said, with safety items. You have economy brakes as well, which last forever because they don't wear down. But that's what a brake disc does. Like a brake disc is going to be there and that's going to be spinning with the hub, and then your brake pads clamp onto it like two hands clapping. But think about it, it's friction. It's going to wear down that brake pad. And that's what happens. It's an action and reaction. The action is the clamping and slowing down of the brake disc and therefore the hub and the wheel as a result. And the reaction to that is that you'll be losing material on the pad and it'll wear down over time. Kind of like an eraser, I guess. That if you get a pencil with an eraser on the end and you put it on the table and you start to move it across the table, you'll feel resistance. And it's slowing down the hand movement as if you had, versus the ballpoint end of a pencil or a pen, I should say. And as a result, it's wearing that down, and you'll find that over time, if you did it for a long enough stretch, that rubber will get lesser and lesser and lesser, and it will wear down until you're at the base of the pencil. So, yeah, it's something that it just blows my mind that people don't think about. And that's sort of the main point I was making, is that if you don't understand why and how something works, then you're missing out the core point of the issue. But look, I think we've carried on long enough. We're getting to the end of our show now. So look, I'm going to wrap things up here and say, look, if you like the show, definitely hit that like button. We're here every Thursday, you and I, hopefully, or someone else, but we'll be here every Thursday, and hopefully I'll have a guest on soon as well. We'll be able to have a chat further. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you'd like to hear more, and the bell notification as well. And we'll be uploading once again every Thursday morning. We're up here at 12:15 a.m. We upload, and we will see you then. So in any case, if you've got anything that you'd like me to have a chat about, or anything you'd like to go into, any topics that you'd like me to revisit or anything, if you've got any criticisms or anything like that, I am all ears. Anyway, I'll leave that with no further ado, and we will see you next week. Have fun.